All right, so I'm gonna talk about Azure DevOps today. So someone had a question earlier. You're gonna present how to deploy to AWS using Azure, and that seems weird, and we're gonna talk about all that. Actually, I gave this presentation to the .NET users group, which I'm a co-organizer for, and we ended up talking so much about AWS, I thought it might be useful for you all as well. So at any point, feel free to ask questions, and we'll go over anything that you have. So just a little bit about me. My name's Robbie Schiefer. My Twitter handle is Chief7. I blog at .NETcatch.com, and I'm currently the Director of Engineering for a company called Suture Health that is over on Beacon Parkway. And so just a little bit about what they do. Our main product is helps doctors get orders signed faster, and the medical providers that need those documents signed. It helps them all get signed faster. More generally, we just healthcare software as a service offerings, but that's kind of currently what we're doing. And a lot of what I'll talk about today was the process of building a new API that external clients can use through their EMR or their technology systems to send data to us that they need to get signed. So traditionally we've done .NET development using web forms and MVC. That's all hosted in EC2 currently, but with all this new stuff, we really wanted to constrain ourselves to some of the newer serverless offerings from AWS. And so we've kind of taken a constraint-driven development approach to, we're really only going to do serverless unless we just have to use something that's not serverless. So we're kind of focused on those serverless services, and we went through the process of creating a DevOps pipeline for all of that and ended up using Azure Devops. So most of this, we'll start off and just talk about Azure DevOps in general, and then I want to show some of our pipelines and some of the ways that we use it at Suture. So just a little bit about Azure DevOps. It's a new product name for a product that's been around for quite a while, actually. It started out as something before this, but Team Foundation Server was one of the early incarnations of the product, which was an on-prem server offering from Microsoft back in the Balmer days. Those were the dark days, if you didn't know. It's gone through several incarnations, and as Azure became more of a product for Microsoft, they transitioned that on-prem product to the cloud, and it was called Visual Studio Team Services for a long time, and then in August, I think, August-September timeframe, they renamed it to Azure DevOps. So part of the reason they did that, because they didn't like the word Visual Studio being in the name, because it made developers think, hey, you can only use this if you're using Visual Studio. And so they went to a name that has Azure in the name, which makes developers think, oh, you can only use it with Azure. But that's not the case. So you can use it with any platform, any cloud, any tool set really easily. So they're on Twitter. They have a hashtag as well. So if you want to thank Microsoft for the food, you can take a picture and tweet them and thank them for supporting the group. So just to kind of give a foundation for DevOps, when we talk about that, I really like the definition that Donovan Brown, who's kind of the chief DevOps guy at Microsoft, kind of coined. He said, DevOps is a union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery and value to end users. So, you know, a lot of people will go in and say, hey, if you just install this product, or if you just use this product, you'll be doing DevOps. And at least in my opinion, I think really the people side of it is probably the most important. You also need a process to go along with that, but it's really the union of those three things that produce a successful DevOps process. So, you know, what does that mean? What do high-performing companies get out of having DevOps and using DevOps? Just a show of hands, how many folks are currently doing DevOps in their professional jobs? Okay, so maybe half. Okay. So, you know, they have the annual State of DevOps report that goes out, and, you know, they find some really interesting statistics from that. That these high performers in the DevOps space deploy 46 times more quickly than others, which gives them a faster time to market. They have a 7 times lower failure rate. It produces faster lead times. And as a result, they have data that shows that it produces more revenue for those companies as well. And probably one of the most interesting things I think is when something goes wrong, because it will, their mean time to recovery is 2,000 times faster than their competitors, which is huge. You know, you hear about some of these data security issues, Target and all these big companies that had this fallout, these problems. And you know, they may say that in a month that they fixed it, but behind the scenes they have months, years of additional work to fix the underlying problem, to fix the underlying data. And what they found that with high-performing DevOps companies, that their mean time to recovery is much, much faster, which is a really great reason to look into it. So just kind of breaking that down a little bit further from a technology side of things, most people when they talk about DevOps, they're really talking about a continuous integration process, a continuous delivery process, and then continuous learning and monitoring. So those are kind of the key areas that we'll kind of walk through today. So as far as Azure DevOps, the product, there's really 5 main components to that, which kind of correlate to your CD process. So Azure Boards is all about tracking work. So they have Agile Scrum boards and Kanban boards and all those things. There's Azure Pipelines, which is more of your build and your release process. They have Azure Repos, which is a source code repository, and they support multiple versions there of source control. Azure Test Plans, which is test plan and suite management. And then Azure Artifacts, which is a packaging process and tool as well. So we'll look at these a little bit more deeply. So Azure Pipelines is kind of the premier offering at this point. Like I said, they transitioned a lot of this product from TFS to VSTS now to Azure DevOps. And Pipelines is probably where they've put the most effort at this point, and they're continuing to bring everything else over. Everything is supported today, but they've just done more work here, so it's a little bit more fleshed out than the other offerings. And you know, one of the things that they like to say, Microsoft does, that Azure Pipelines is for any language, any platform, any cloud. And they have all kinds of videos online where Donovan Brown or their different DevOps evangelists show how they're deploying C++ apps or printer hardware, firmware, or IoT, mobile apps, Python, PHP, every platform, every language, any developer, they try to show how that can be used. So we'll look at the marketplace in a little bit, but they have a ton of built-in offerings as far as capabilities within the product for those other platforms. And then it's an extensible model where if you don't find what you're looking for, you can build on top of it using their APIs and all the extensibility that they have, and we'll look a little bit at that. It also supports containers and Kubernetes, it's all open source. So the projects, for the tasks and this extensibility and all those things, most of what they do for the product is all on GitHub. So if you have questions, you can look at that. So this is kind of the we are not evil anymore section of the talk. Microsoft has historically been given this history, or they've really earned the history of being an evil big corporation, you know, when they were the market leader in various segments. But after Ballmer left and Satya started, it's kind of a whole new Microsoft. And I think we'll look at a few things, but you know, the thing that they ask is that you judge us on what we're doing today, not what we did back then. And I think they've done quite a bit to kind of show. If you look at a timeline of just the open source path that they've taken over the last 6 or so years, and really their open source started back in, I think it was 2006. They started open sourcing, I think Wix was the first one. I forget what Wix stands for, but it's a deployment tool. But even back in 2006, they started that. But really, I think since Satya took over, it's exponentially increased the amount of open source that they're doing. Even making claims that Microsoft loves Linux and building their own Linux distribution. Did anybody know Microsoft has a Linux distribution called Sphere? It's pretty cool. They joined the Node.js Foundation. They built a Linux subsystem into Windows itself. They released SQL Server on Linux. And now they have some really tight integrations with GitHub, and they're the largest contributor of open source on GitHub, have more contributors and more open source than anybody else. So As a Microsoft fan, a longtime Microsoft fan, it's nice to see that we've made that turn and they're taking a better approach than they had in the past. So they love open source so much that Azure Pipelines is essentially free for anything on GitHub, a public repo. So that includes 10 free parallel jobs. There's a certain number of minutes that you can use for build time, but I think I calculated at one point you could build a project that took 5 minutes. I think was what you could build it twice a day, every day of the month, and have plenty of minutes to do that. And they've got really tight integration that I think we'll look at as well that make it really easy that if you don't have a CD pipeline or CI build as part of your GitHub project, it's just a few clicks within the GitHub marketplace and you can set that up and use it for free. That also includes both or all three Windows, Mac OS, and Linux builds. So if you don't have a Mac and you want to do Xamarin development or Mac OS development using the Visual Studio tools, you can use their build process if it's an open source project to build that, which is a pretty neat offering. So it's integrated into GitHub, and you go into the marketplace and you can just click a few buttons and set up a new plan and have it up and running pretty quickly, which is really nice. We already saw that. So that was Azure Pipelines. Azure Boards is all about work item tracking and management. And so really it's the full spectrum of tracking, everything from kind of portfolio management, high-level, executive-type project management, all the way down to Scrum tasks and boards and things. Then they also offer some project insights as well, and we'll demo that in a little bit. Azure Repos is their Git source, or their source control repos. They support both Git server on the Azure DevOps product, or you can integrate with GitHub. And then they also have TFVC, which is their proprietary source control system. But they have all kinds of hooks and API integrations that you can install and leverage with that as well. And then semantic code searching to make it easier to find code within those repos. They also have Azure Test Plans. This is one of the ones that's, they're still working on getting more of it out there. But if you have manual test cases or even automated test case plans and suites that you need to manage, they offer a tool for managing those and all the pretty charts and graphs to know what's succeeding and what hasn't yet. Artifacts is a packaging tool, so if you're familiar with NuGet or NPM, it's just another version of a packaging tool that they offer in the box with Azure DevOps as well. And now let's look at it. Any questions so far? So we'll look at that. They have a console where you can just do it all in the UI, but then they also have YAML-based configuration. Today, the YAML is primarily used for the build system, but they're working on that to handle the release pipelines as well, so that's coming. Any other questions?
Does the test plan have any type of import capability from other?
Does what have import?
Import capability of the existing test cases from other files?
I'm not sure. I'm sure it would support migration from TFS to Azure DevOps, but I'm not sure if they have any other. That's a great question, and I could probably find a contact. If there's a specific product you're looking for, I could definitely ask that question and get an answer on that. All right, cool. So we'll try to make this. Everybody see that? Is that too small or okay? Okay. So this is just a test project that I set up. They've got all of the, let me do this. Okay. So they have all of the standard summary type stuff. You can set up different projects if you have different divisions within a company that each need their own. You can set all those up and then look at things at the different levels. They have dashboards that you can set up with widgets. I'm not sure if this one has a bunch of widgets on it. I think it does. Yeah, so we'll go to the overview. You can set up, whatever is valuable for your team or your company. Set up all kinds of widgets to show the health of your projects, whether that's the CI builds, the CD pipelines, the state of stories, or the sprint, all kinds of widgets and graphs and prettiness. They also include a wiki if you need a place to store documentation. Not quite as good as the GitHub documentation side of things, their wiki, but it's plenty capable. It's what we use at Suture. So that's there. They have all kinds of management stuff. I'm not going to show that as far as securing it and auditing and all that jazz. It's everything you would expect. From the board standpoint, you can look at the work items themselves, the backlog. This is just a listing of all of the different items. Let's go to the backlog view. So here, there we go. So this is just the product backlog listing, and you can look at that from different perspectives. Their general structure is epics have features, features have stories, stories have tasks. That's all customizable. They have several different, I forget what they call them, different structures. You can say, I want to use a waterfall process, I want to use an agile process. So they have all that built in. I think this is the agile. It's either the agile or Scrum, I can't remember. But they've got different ones you can configure on the back side. And that customizes all these names. If you want to customize it beyond that, you can change the names of things, you can add new fields, you can do all the customization you want, which is no small task for a cloud-based product that is shared by everyone, but it's actually pretty neat how that works. But you can view things at the epic level or the feature level, and there's a hierarchy that you can view there. You can add in additional stories or bugs, whatever it is, and then you can go in and look at the details of one of those, and they have all of these built out to try to mimic or work toward the standard of whatever process you're using. Process templates, that's what those are called. So when this comes up, it'll be all the information I think about a story is what I clicked. It has a description and all kinds of attributes and things. Check my internet. There we go. So they have titles, they have IDs, who's it assigned to. You can add comments and tagging. You can edit the description and set the acceptance criteria. You can have ongoing discussion about the various item. Priority. They have a really advanced linking system where you can link stories to almost anything, to other stories. You can have predecessors, successors. You can have a parent feature. You can link it to commits. You can link it to releases. All kinds of things. Here you can see some of the related work. This is a check-in. Oh no, that's the parent feature. But you can create you can even create a new branch. So if this is a story that you just picked up and it's assigned to you and you want to create a new branch and you have source control integrated into the project, you can just create a new branch and it'll assign this story to that branch. You can do all your work there and eventually build it and release it out to your environments. They have all the audit history stuff, so you can see the states that the item went through. This is just more of the linking. You can add attachments. There's a structure of areas and iterations, which is just organization so that you can organize your stories and bugs and everything in the appropriate places and keep better track of that. That's kind of it for a story. I don't know if I have any bugs in here. Looks like not. But then, when you're ready to start planning your sprint, doing that is just as easy. First, defining a sprint, and then you can drag whatever work over to that sprint, and it starts to keep a running total of how many stories are in that sprint. And obviously, you can have I can add a new sprint and put things there. So really handy. I don't know if it's a good validate. But it makes it really easy to plan out your sprints and organize everything. Let's see. So that was the just kind of list, the backlog view. They also have the board view, and you can have, this is the Epic board. So when you're kind of thinking about it more from a portfolio standpoint and large pieces of work, what am I going to do for the next few years or the next year? You can start to plan out what epics are important, document those and prioritize them with stack ranking. And then when you're ready to start one, you can put those in progress and track the progress of those over time. In the same way, you can go to the feature level and do the same thing, and also at the backlog item or the story level. And then here you can see some of the customizations that we've made to the cards themselves. So some really rich capabilities as far as color coding and conditional display of the card. You can control, what fields show up on the card, who's it's assigned to, the short title, the priority, the area, some of the tags, and then you can track those items and drag them across the board as things complete as well. You can customize all of the columns for the boards as well to whatever your process is for your teams, and track things through that. We go to the sprint level, you can actually track capacity. So I'm not sure if I have any, so I've got plenty of people here. You can set the capacity, which is number of points per day for each person, and assign them different columns in the board, so that if you have some folks that are handling, requirements gathering, and those folks, they can do that piece, and others can do development. It's actually really handy for tracking days off so that you can plan capacity appropriately. If folks are going to be taking time off or you have holidays, you can track all that, which is really nice. And then ultimately, once you set all those things, it gives you what the capacity is for the given sprint. So right now, I've selected the next sprint, and I'm setting the capacity for that. And so once I do that, and I go to the backlog, it'll show my capacity here. I didn't save it, and so it didn't show it, but it's really nice for tracking what the capacity of the team is, and then actually planning for that capacity and dragging things into the board. And then from a Scrum task board standpoint, I may not have one. If you're doing true Scrum and tracking things at that level, you can add tasks under each story and plan those out. And then obviously have multiple stories as well and track the progress of those stories and tasks at that level. For our team, I'll show our board, but we basically just use a Kanban board for sprint planning. We don't really get to the task level, except occasionally. And do it that way. So that's how we do it. But if you want to do the full Scrum board, you can do that as well. Query, so they've got a querying system where you can create reports based on iteration or basically any of the attributes of the story. I don't know. Yeah. So everything assigned to me or followed work items. You can go to the editor and add in new clauses or queries to build out the query and base it on various items and build all those things out as well. One way that we have used or been able to migrate data, there's an Excel plugin that integrates into this. So what you can do is build out all of your structure in Azure Devops and then link to that from Excel. And then you just copy over the things that you want from whatever other system into Excel and then import them in straight from Excel, which is really nice. It's more of a manual way to do it, but we have done that before, and that's works pretty well. And then the plans, again, is more around the kind of portfolio management side of things, planning out from a higher level, setting up the epics, and it builds you a timeline. And you can go from there. And then lastly, under boards, you can track the calendar. We don't use this one all that much. I think it shows you, when folks are off And I think from a high level where your sprints are, I think they were back in July somewhere. Yeah. So you can see where your sprint starts and ends, and I think you can add other things, new item. So after that, we've got, I guess before we keep going, any questions on boards? Yes?
What tool did you guys, it sounds like you guys are using this in production. What tool did you guys use prior?
So prior to this, they used Bitbucket, some work item tracking tool from ReSharper. I forget the name of it. They used Excel for test case management.
I was just referring to
The boards. So that was the ReSharper or JetBrains solution. I forget what it was called. Anybody know the name of it? Yeah, I don't know. That's at Suture Health. I worked at EBSCO for 10 years, and we used Agile Central, which was called something before that, but I forget what it was. And it was funny, actually, when we started doing Kanban at EBSCO, we evaluated the VSTS product at the same time and compared it to Agile Central. And at that point, Microsoft was like 6 months behind where Agile Central was, and so they didn't have quite as many features. But I think at this point, the two products are really comparable. Anybody know the Agile? It's called Agile Central now. It used to be called something else. Rally. But it works really well. You know, I've used it. We did use this with the internal systems group that I was in at EBSCO, the TFS incarnation of it, for a little while, and ultimately we just decided we needed further Kanban specific capabilities, which Agile Central or Rally provided. But once I started at Suture Health in January of this year, and by then they had really caught up with everything, and so we use this exclusively now. Any other questions? Cool.
How married are you to this?
How married?
Yeah, I mean, like, seriously, if it's just all in crap right now, and you're like, I gotta leave this and go to GitHub and, plugins and GitHub and that sort of thing.
Are you like, how easy would it be to transition out?
How could you transition out of this?
Okay.
What's the path out?
Yeah. So, I mean, all the source control, if you choose to use their source control, it's just a Git server, and so you can just copy everything over. Everything is, you can, again, export it to Excel. You can create all those query reports. I can't think of anything that really ties you to the product where you couldn't leave. Obviously, when we look at the pipeline configurations and things, there's going to be tasks there that are built for VSTS, and so you have to rewrite your build and pipeline stuff. Other than that, that's really just investment that you've made into the product. Outside of that, I don't see anything that would kind of keep you there or prevent you from leaving. Good question. Anything else?
How do you manage users?
So they have different options. The way we use, we do it, it'll link up with Azure Active Directory, and you can manage it that way, and it's just connected there. You can use Microsoft users. I think they have a couple of OAuth capabilities where you can say, I want to use a Gmail user or whatever, but I can actually show that. But you assign users to different projects. So you can define your teams and members of the team. And there's all kinds of fine-grained controls for who can create a GitHub or a Git repo, and who can change a work item or mark an item as complete, who can deploy the pipeline, all that kind of stuff. So
I guess my real question is, are those roles managed in this, or are they managed maybe in AD? If I've got 5,000 people doing this,
Sure.
I want to do a theme inside.
yeah, I haven't done it personally, but my understanding is it will connect with Azure AD, and you can reuse roles over in Azure DevOps as well. Just trying to look. So I'll show the service hooks real quick. I think we have service hooks set up for Slack to where when someone puts a note on a ticket, that goes into Slack. When we have a failed release, that goes into Slack. Various things there, and so they have AppVeyor and Bamboo and FlowDoc and Jenkins and Trello, all kinds of stuff. And then if you just have a webhook, you can use a webhook as well. So that's pretty cool. Let's see, GitHub, actually let's just go to service connections. So in the same way, you can also connect to outside services as well, like GitHub or various things. So Bitbucket Cloud, Chef, Docker Host, Docker Registry, Jenkins, Kubernetes, NPM, all kinds of connections you can make to outside systems and integrate it into your Azure DevOps system as well. Any other questions on just settings or general configuration? I can cover that while we're here. Okay. So now to pipelines. So the build section is where you really you build up your continuous integration, or it can be anything, but primarily it's your continuous integration pipeline, and we can go in and edit that. So I'm editing it through the console, obviously, but you can also configure all of this through YAML, check it into your source code, and then when you do a check-in, it'll automatically kick off the pipeline with whatever YAML you have. So it's similar to a Jenkins file, if you're familiar with that. So here, this is doing a .NET Core deployment. It pulls some packages from NPM. It runs Bower and Gulp. It publishes the test results to Azure DevOps. It copies some files and publishes the artifacts from the build. And so for each one of these, you have configuration for that task that you can perform, giving it whatever arguments that you need. They have a whole variable system where you can define variables for your pipeline and inject those through tokens. You can set up triggers either through check-in policies or based on a schedule or based on another build completing. You can set up branch filters or path filters. And then there's other options here as well. So everything from creating work items on failure to status badges and build agent settings and things. So they have hosted build agents that you can use, and you get a certain number of free minutes for that, even for a non-open source project. Or you can download the agent and install that locally. They'll allow you to do that for free with one local agent. And then, because Azure DevOps is still the orchestration plane, there's an amount of work there. And so the way they charge is how many agents you have that allow you to run things in parallel. So one is free. You get, if you have MSDN licenses and an enterprise license, they give you an additional one for each one of those as well. And then beyond that, it's 40? I'll have to look at that. Is that recent?
Looked at it day before yesterday.
Okay, that seems, I thought it was like 24.
$40 a month,
Okay,
not for a bill.
right, yes, right. So,
That's equivalent to at least a couple of other services.
right,
That pricing is very effective.
yeah. I thought it was more like 24, but
I might have been looking at something different.
yeah, we can look at it. But yeah, so that's some of the options. There's also retention policies around how long do you want to keep the details for that build or that release. I think it defaults to 30 days or 10 good builds. And I think you can do up to a year of retention for that as well. And then it keeps a history of all of the changes to the build as well there. And then when you actually run the build, you have all kinds of summary results around the success and the running of that build. So here you can look at each individual task that ran, and it has logs around what occurred and if any errors occurred, any of that stuff. So let's see, but here's the gulp task, and you can see all of the commands it ran and the output that it had. What else is there? You can see the test runs I'm not sure if this one has any tests. Yeah, 6 passed. See all the details in log form, or you can go to the summary page. And it looks a little bit prettier. You can see what artifacts were dropped. Any associated changes, which is actually pretty neat. So I don't know if I can show that or not. Well, maybe. But what's really neat is as things go out, Azure DevOps is keeping track of all of the commits and the stories that were completed associated with that change. So when a release goes out that includes 50 commits, it aggregates all of the work items and the releases and the check-ins associated with that. So you can say, for this release, what did that include? Which is really great for our product owners. They can go out and see exactly what was there. Uh-huh.
Can I run that test in the build pipeline and fail the build based on a test that exists?
Yes. So, I mean, we'll look at some of the different tasks, but there's a scripting task, and you can use Bash or PowerShell or what.
The Azure testing, the testing stuff that's in Azure DevOps.
Yeah, so that's one thing we haven't gotten into quite yet. I know in the old TFS days, you could absolutely link the execution of tests during a build with the test suite and the test plans, and even see which ones were automated, which ones were manual, and it would push data to it. And there was, I think we saw there was a publish test results. That's part of what that does. There's some upfront overhead that you have to do to link the test case itself to code, to a test. But if you have that hooked up, it will aggregate the results and put them into the test plans area. So let's go back. So here's a summary view of the test as well in the system. You can see how many passed, how many failed, and there's no failures. If there were failures, it would show you some of the logs and the error messages as well. So let's actually look at the pipeline for a minute. So we saw some of the tasks that were there. Give me an example of something that y'all work on that you think it wouldn't support, and we'll see if it's in there. Let's just look for Maven. So there's a Maven build. So we'd have to look at we can go to learn. Yeah? Okay. So, anything, this is doing a search locally to see anything you have installed, or it'll actually look in the marketplace for you automatically. And in this case, this Maven task was already installed, but they had some other things here that it thought were similar. So Spock. Is that like a JavaScript? What's the language? Groovy? Yeah. If there isn't a task and you can run it with a script, you can always just add a bash command, which is kind of your last thing if you wanted to build it. Like I said, you can use all of their APIs and their extensibility points to build it yourself. Or there are some tasks that only live on GitHub, meaning the author didn't go through the process of actually adding it to the marketplace, which can just kind of be a hassle for them sometimes. So you might find one on GitHub as well. But they're pretty proud of the fact that they say you can do anything you need to do because as a last resort, you can always use Bash or some kind of scripting to get it done. And some of the stuff that they've done in some of the keynotes are pretty interesting. Even as to me. One of the more advanced one is handling the process of getting it into the iOS marketplace as an app. They built a whole pipeline for that, and I think it probably had some hooks into another product that Microsoft has called App Central, or I don't know. It's some mobility mobile app thing that kind of coordinates with it as well. But if anyone's ever tried to get an iOS app into the marketplace, it's nothing short of a miracle when it arrives.
So let's say I had like 1,000 projects.
Uh-huh.
5 or 10.
Okay.
And I don't want to build this.
Sure.
So is it just a YAML file in my config and it contains a template that I built that I've transmitted to all 10,000 of these projects. I'm going to ingest all 10,000 of them as running tasks in it. Does it just go read that file, a name file, not like
Yeah.
a TFS
So
or whatever?
I forget the exact name, but if you name a file a certain way, it just picks it up. You don't have to do anything.
And the config drops in here and it builds all these steps out.
That's right. It looks a little bit different. You actually can't edit the tasks when it does it that way because your source is a YAML file in source code, right? But for any one of these tasks that are installed, you can also view the YAML. So the process that I typically use is go make it work in the console first so that you can debug and troubleshoot things, and then once it's the way you want it, then you grab that YAML, go stick it in your source control, and it just builds it, which is pretty sweet. Let's add that tab. Let's go back to the Maven one, and there was something down here. So if you want to get something for free, it goes out to the marketplace, and there are some paid ones, but honestly, I've never actually seen one. I think there's some that are product-based for like other services that will integrate into Azure Devops, but even those have a get started for free type offering. But you just click the button here, and it says, okay, which project do you want to install this to based on your credentials? And you choose which one you want, and then 30 seconds later, it's available. So it's looked at who I am and what repositories I have access to. Sure, we'll use that one. Actually, I don't think that one's mine. That one's definitely mine. Choose which one you want. It checks permissions, and you can install. You can proceed back to the organization. And so now, if I refresh, I might need to refresh the page. Now, if I look for this J-test again, I should see it in my list. It may take it a minute. But obviously, there's security behind the scenes as far as who can install certain things, and it adheres to all of those as well. Any other tasks anybody wants to look for? Any questions about the build or build process? So this is the build section. So this is kind of a linear. Technically, it's not, but you really just have one pipeline, right? And you can run things in parallel. You can add a second agent job here and then choose to do things in parallel. So one of the things that we do, because we're using .NET Core, I want to build on both Windows and Linux, because there's certain times where you can have a failure on one versus the other. So I do an actual compile and a unit test run on both a Linux agent and a Windows agent. But I've seen other ones where it was a mobile app and they wanted to build the iOS app and the Android app at the same time. So you can do parallelism, all that kind of stuff. Set up different jobs. You can choose the agents that it runs on. But it's kind of, everything's all in this one view. The release pipeline is a little bit different in that you have different stages. So it's like one of those things that you can reapply for every stage. So this is where we're going to take a package or some kind of artifact and deploy it to many different environments. And you can define as many stages as you want. They can be linear or separate. You can have multiple of these, and you can set up triggers as far as this one starts when the last one finishes. You can give it all kinds of quality gates as well to say, this has to run in the given environment for at least 5 minutes, and it'll check monitoring. So if, I think the monitoring that they have built in is the Azure monitoring. I forget what app monitoring something or other. Insights, thank you. And it can integrate with that, and it can check those monitoring. You just point to the right place, and it says, okay, if I get 5 minutes without any kind of degradation of service, then I'll go ahead and deploy to the next environment. You can have manual gates where you say, well, our product owner is the only one that can deploy into the UAT environment or whatever rules you have. You can do it based on pull requests. You set up the artifacts over on this left side, and you can add different artifacts, and you can choose a GitHub repo or TFVC or Azure repos. I'm not sure what else. There's a few more. You can based on artifacts or Docker Hub or even a Jenkins build as well.
So what if you were already using something like Chef? That integrate into this part? Or?
Yeah, so depending on what pieces of Chef that you're using, if you're purely using it for infrastructure automation, there's tasks in the builds, in the pipeline system for that, where you can just say, hey, go run my Chef script. If you're using some of the newer tools that do like the full orchestration, there may be more overlap there than makes sense. But like in this case, if you've already invested in a CI process for Jenkins and you don't want to get rid of that, you can use that as the main artifact and then build all your pipelines here. Or if you want to do the opposite, if you want to handle your CI builds with Azure DevOps and then say, okay, then go put it in this repo and then my Chef orchestration tool is going to pick it up from there. You can do that. So you can just mix and match with whatever makes sense for your team or your company. But there's all kinds of things that you can set up there. Again, you can use the service connections that we saw a minute ago to do that and choose the Jenkins job.
Does it normalize paths between like a Linux box and a Windows box?
Give me an example of.
//.
I haven't come across any issues with that, and we're primarily developing on Windows machines, and then we're deploying to Linux environments. And we haven't hit any issues. I've got the build that runs on both Windows and Linux, so it just seems to take care of it. I haven't had that issue.
You have to configure the Windows build differently than you do the,
No, when we go over to the suture pipeline, remind me and I'll show you. I think we copied and pasted the tasks from the Windows build over to that one because it's a .NET Core build task, which it handles both in the same way. So that's similar. But if we actually, so you define these stages, and that generally is your different environments in your CD pipeline. And then you can go to the task for that. And now it's kind of a similar view to what we saw before, to where build was just a single pipeline or set of tasks. Now you can have a different set of tasks for each environment. And I don't think there's one here. But you can create task groups. And I forget how I did that. But anyway, and I'll show you on our Suture Health one. But we basically had a set of tasks that we want to perform in every environment. So you just group those and put them into a task group, and then you can just reuse that. And they have variables that you can override or configure for the differences in each environment. But I think it's exactly the same list of tasks that we saw on the build side. So whichever method works better for your use case, you can do that and kind of go from there. They do have the categorization of tasks if you don't want to look at them all. They have the search. You can set up variables. So if you want to add environment-based variables or any kind of variable, you can set that up here. You can mark them as secrets. If you want, then they'll be obscured both here in the variable setup and then also in any of the logs. Again, we have retention and options as well. Any questions on any of that? I'm kind of breezing through it so that we can kind of look at the stuff that we built. Say again? Crap. Okay, so let's just jump to that then. Let's see, I think. So here is our release pipeline. Let's look at the build though first. All right. So here's where we set up the Windows build job and the Linux build job, and the Linux is really just a subset of what we have on the Windows side, where we run a .NET Core build, which runs on the Linux side, and then we run our unit tests as well. And if we look at, I can't show you the edit view because it wouldn't show the tasks, but I can show the YAML file. So there's some general stuff at the top, some of the options, and then you have what they call phases, and that's where we have a Windows build phase, and then a Linux build phase close to the bottom. Linux build phase, it has a display name, and then the tasks are install .NET Core if you need to, and then it runs the build command for the .NET CLI, and I'm pretty sure that's just a straight copy paste from the Windows side. And then the same thing, it's just a test .NET CLI command. So that's there. Let's kind of roll through the test. So in our case, this is the full serverless API system that we're building. And so it gets the source, it installs .NET Core, it runs NuGet restore, it runs build and test. We do some code analysis with SonarQube, static code analysis and things. We publish the analysis of that. We publish the test results. We use a tool called SQL Deploy, which is built on top of MS Deploy for SQL Server deployments, because that's automated as part of our process as well. We set the version number, and we copy all of our CloudFormation templates into the artifacts. We zip up all of the Lambda code into zip packages, and we put that in the artifacts here at the bottom. And then when we get into the release pipeline, we do some general stuff. So we upload the packages to S3 so the CloudFormation templates have access to those. We basically have two CloudFormation stacks. One's a shared stack that we use for multiple environments, things like VPCs, VPN configuration, some S3 bucket stuff. But things that we need across multiple environments that are shared, our RDS server is there as well. And then we actually have the environment stack that runs, which is right there. So we have an environment stack for each stage or each environment. So we go from a CI environment to QA to demo to prod. It creates a new CloudFormation stack and deploys everything to it auto-magically. We routinely just delete the stacks. We actually have another pipeline for deleting a stack as well, so that it'll tear down everything and then we can rebuild it again purely from those CloudFormation templates. There's a few scripting things here where we need to move some credentials around or move some packages around. But by and large, we have a shared stack CloudFormation task and a environment stack. So we primarily use this set of tasks from AWS. So AWS has quite a few tools for .NET developers, if you didn't know. One is this set of tools for Azure Devops, formerly known as Visual Studio Team Services. They also have a Visual Studio plugin. They have Visual Studio Code plugins as well. So that's all out there and useful if you're doing .NET development. Or really, if you use Visual Studio or VS Code, those are worth getting. But so you can see the different tasks over on this right side. They have a Beanstalk deployment, a Lambda deployment, CloudFormation, and Cloud Deploy. We really just use the CloudFormation task because we do everything through CloudFormation templates. So just to give you an idea of what that includes, smaller. This is kind of a obscured version of what we have that we're deploying out. So we're using API Gateway to provide the front end to the APIs. We have Lambdas actually running the API code. We have an S3 bucket, both in the environment and up at the shared stack. And then we have a S3 trigger that kicks off a workflow using State Machine. And we have many steps there that perform the workflow for the system. We have, so this first one is an external API to outside customers. Then we have several internal APIs as well that are all versioned and have their own database. We integrate into our legacy systems via activity steps, I think is what they're called. So it's kind of a stop point within State Machine where you say, hey, I need somebody else to go do work, and this legacy system calls back and asks, hey, do you have any work for me? And it does the work and then says when it's done. So it's 4 APIs one RDS server with many databases, a state machine, all the API gateway configuration, all the S3 configuration, everything through CloudFormation. We're using VPCs and Route 53, X-Ray, and CloudWatch for monitoring and logging. That's basically it. The versioning is kind of interesting. And this is highly debatable depending on the process that you use, but we don't roll, we never change old code. We always roll forward. So if you need to make a patch or fix something, you have to do that in production, and that requires a different process for our development team. But the result of that is we can keep old versions of the service around in the Lambda and redeploy it based on packages that were stored in S3. And we use API Gateway to host multiple versions of that and URL routing to send it to the right version. But we're actually deploying all of this as part of that pipeline that you saw because we're one development team right now. If we were to separate things out and say, okay, this team's going to handle state machines, this team's going to handle APIs, we could effectively just split the source code and use the same pipeline, and then each one would have independent pipelines as well. So we've kind of architected it in such a way that we can split it out, but because we're only one team, having multiple pipelines for all this stuff is just overhead. It's less valuable. So we do it all together, and then when we have the need to break things out, it's basically a pipeline that can deploy all the types of things that I just mentioned. S3, Lambda, API Gateway, VPCs, RDS, all of those things. So it's a YAML file and a pipeline that we can, to your point, use it on as many projects as we need. If we have a whole new product line or development team that needs something, they can basically just copy our YAML file and go from there. So, any questions? I know that was pretty quick. Anybody else doing serverless or having trouble deploying serverless to AWS? Yeah, so we do quite a bit of that. We rely mainly on unit testing for that. We have a suite of integration tests as well that test it in the environment. We're starting to look at the CLI, SAM CLI for local testing, which is a little bit closer. But for our needs, we've been able to test most of what we're doing through unit and integration tests pretty easily. Yeah.
But the problem that we experience, all of our deployments, nothing we do is CloudFormation because I don't know why you never do that. That's horrific.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So we've some of the guys on the team have heard that same sentiment, and it's
I would rather carve out my own eyeballs than
really.
that stuff. Yeah.
So
Code to write the JSON for CloudFormation to avoid.
we've done that as well. The state machine.
No way.
Yeah, state machines are kind of a pill in CloudFormations right now. They do have the new, I think they call it the CDK, which is supposed to make that better. But we did the same thing, and so it has had some challenges. But the net result is I can tear down an environment and rebuild it with CloudFormation templates in about 20 minutes.
Yeah,
And
we do the same thing with Terraform.
oh, okay. So you're using a similar. Okay.
Right. You're still stuck with the problem of making, like, how do you know that your stuff is right? So the problem that you always experience in every serverless deployment is, are my profiles right to let this piece talk to that piece?
Right.
And the only way to know that is to actually dump the entire thing live in the system. Because otherwise you have a Cartesian problem, a Cartesian result problem.
Yep.
Does this work with this? Well, does it work when I have this and this?
That's right.
Does it work when I have this and this and this? And then, so it's a factorial issue. What's the one? 1 plus 2 plus 3? Anyway, it's like an n-1 factorial problem.
Yeah.
Of finding the number of possible places that your deployment could be wrong. Once you're to this place and you're live deploying a pod, it's a different problem, right? If you break that, you know that it was the most recent commit that broke it. But the problem is this is relatively simplistic compared to ours.
Sure.
And so, we got like 100 units on that thing. And
Yeah.
any piece of them, and they're all required
Yep.
And
So when I was at EBSCO, it was more similar to that, right? Where we had 12 development teams at one point, and each team had different products that they owned, and they had dependencies between each other, right? And so at the end of the day, it really came down to that team owning that product and making sure they're good about providing documented versions and letting consumers know, so there's a lot of process that goes into that. But the idea was to build this in such a way that we could get to that point once Suture Health grew. But a lot of that comes down to process and just making sure. Yeah.
And there's no way to test it. There's just not. It's one and done. You stand it up, and if your stuff will go through it in all the ways you think it will.
Yeah.
And it does. But every line that you have here that moves, every one of those can fail in a
Sure.
different way every time. And so for us, we're going to proceed forward with this architecture, but I hate it.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the code is amazing. It's great. It's tiny and it always works.
You just got more of them, right? Instead of one big thing, you got a bunch of small things. Yeah.
But then distributed architectures aren't. I've never been anybody that felt actually good at it. Everybody has like varying levels of suck.
Yeah.
And so I look at your situation here as being like what we were maybe back in the middle of the summer, where we had half the ones we have now, and those we ended up having every time we would do a new deploy, we were adding a new service, and every time we added a new service, something failed generally because of a role issue.
Right.
And I don't know. Do you have problems managing and do you have do this a lot? When you introduce a new thing, do you guys have role constraints around this, or do you generally encapsulate it like inside of your inside the workload? It's easy, right? They're all inside the same box. You never worry about what they're talking to anything outside of it.
Right.
But every land that you add is either its own entity or it shares a role with everything else that also talks to the same things it talks to.
Yeah.
So is that what y'all do?
So each Lambda has its own role that's created with it as part of CloudFormations. And we have to manage, what does that role have access to? And we do all that through CloudFormation. We for each branch from master, in general, we have very short-lived branches, at max for a single story. And when that spans more than a week, it starts to get painful. We try to either work in master if we can, or move to master as quickly as possible to try to limit how many branches we have. But when you create a new dev branch from master, because of the YAML, it automatically runs the CI build and gets you a deployment pipeline ready so that you can deploy all of this into a stack so that you can have testing there. And you're right, because we're just one team now, we own all of our dependencies. So you don't have to work with other people, right? But ultimately, if you have the right process and each team has this capability, hopefully they're doing some amount of testing, both from an internal perspective of, is our stuff working with each other? And then also, what are the expectations of our consumers, and having some level of testing that I'm not breaking people. And that goes back to versioning strategy, and there's all kinds of facets and tangents you can take there.
It's still one. It's only.
Oh, really?
It's 5 people.
Oh, I thought you meant you had many teams. Oh,
No, we're not. We have lots of stuff. We just don't have a lot of people. Maybe
Gotcha.
Well, 6 people, I guess. But the thing that we've experienced is that it'd be different if there was some sort of code annotation. Like if you could tie, for instance, role management or some abstraction of role management to the actual code instead of the deployment, which is obviously completely separate and an entirely different entity, it would be a little different, I think. There was some mechanism.
yeah.
But to my knowledge,
Interesting.
there's no such reason.
So does Azure Devops provide some type of capability to make the integration testing, these sort of multi-team structure, and to be able to deploy pipelines with it? Does it provide any easy ways to integrate tests?
It has tasks for running integration tests, but honestly, most of that is just development work, to make sure that we have the appropriate subset of tests for whatever you want to test, and dividing up unit tests from integration tests and running, even within your integration test, do I only want to run smoke tests, or is it a full regression integration test suite? At least in our experience, I found it's more about the developers being good about organizing those tests. But as far as for DevOps is concerned, you can run the test whenever it makes sense, and you just set up your orchestration to do it like you want it to. And then you can define the quality gates around that as well, that when I run this set of integration tests, you can't proceed if it doesn't pass 100% or 90% or whatever it is you define. One thing I'll continue to take questions even after we end, but I just did want to share real quick. Azure DevOps provides free usage of the service for teams of 5 or less. It's on one of these slides somewhere. Was that one? But the only constraint is you can only have one private agent. This was the open source stuff. There we go. So here, any open source projects have unlimited users and build time. Small teams, which is up to 5 users, you get 1,800 minutes per month. But most of everything there, I think the 2 main constraints I've seen are the local build agents. You're constrained to 1, then you have to pay for more than that. And then there's around the test case management and the test suite management, there's some extra costs there that we don't really use. But and then beyond that, it's $6 per user per month for the boards and the repos. And then if you have an MSDN license, that covers your license into Azure DevOps. So if you're a .NET team and you have those licenses, there's no extra costs there as well. So.
Do you know if there's plans to actually start merging this with GitHub as an acquisition?
It seems like they're going to keep it really separate from what I've seen. It's kind of similar to the LinkedIn model where they acquired LinkedIn, but the management and the teams are really separate. I think we will see a lot more integration work done to make them work kind of seamlessly with each other. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of questions about, does it even make sense to have Git source control in Azure DevOps when GitHub is already there and there's, it's the same company? I don't know. Yeah, probably.
We pay a lot of money for GitHub.
Yeah, enterprise, yeah.
No, we don't buy it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're in public GitHub.
Okay.
That's a company with AWS user management.
Right.
And it's not cheap.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super not cheap. We have unlimited repositories, unlimited users, blah, 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 and it's not cheap at all. So,
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.